everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, and wherever in the world you may be. My name is Matt Wynn, your podcast host and resident secure identities nerd. Welcome to another episode of HID Connects. So for the past several years, the access control space has been abuzz with talk of all things mobile credentials. So whether it's major players like Apple and Google incorporating credentials into their wallet, universities, corporate real estate firms offering this technology to students and their tenants, it seems as if we are in the middle of a mobile takeover. But despite all this hype, overall adoption of mobile credentials is still relatively low, with reports varying on usage. Now, some indicate it's in use by 5% of end users, others say it's up to 40%. But no matter the number, this means that the physical badge that we all know and love still has a very important place for us now and likely into the future. So with these seemingly two different worlds living in parallel, and let's be real, they're already on a crash course of merging together, how do we balance the promise and benefits of mobile with the ongoing need and benefits for physical credentials? So to help us learn more about this coexistence, I'm excited to be joined in the studio by two experts in their respective domains. First, joining us to share her expertise on all things physical credentials, please welcome Lindsay Martin-Nez, CEO of BadgePass. Lindsay, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Tell us a little about yourself and, of course, about BadgePass.
Absolutely. So you already said who I was. I'm Lindsay Martin-Nez. I'm the CEO of BadgePass. I've been with BadgePass about 15 years now. So I actually started in the security industry at BadgePass as a channel sales rep and kind of grew within the organization. I took over as CEO last January. So it's been a fun little adventure. Amazing.
Well, congratulations on the promo. And rumor has it, Lindsay, that you printed your first ID badge when you were only 6 years old.
I did.
Tell us about that.
I did. I grew up, if you will, in the industry. So my mom owned an integrator business out of Western New York. And so photo IDs have really been a part of my life since I was little. I used to send birthday party invitations on ID badges. I have some posted on LinkedIn. You can see them. They're hilarious. I also use them in elections for student council. So I've been designing IDs for a long, long time.
That is absolutely amazing. I ran for student council in middle school, and my motto was win with win.
Oh,
if I had had a badge pass, that would have been a lot better. I did not win that election, but I don't blame the slogan. But Lindsay, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah. Very excited to have you. All right, and also joining us to discuss the mobile side of the credential spectrum is Phil Coppola, YouTube dude and mobile evangelist at HID. So Phil, thank you for coming all this way to join us. Tell us about yourself and what you do here at HID.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. This is fantastic. I am also a lifer in the physical security industry. I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, and recently, within the last 4 or 5 years, become a physical security professional, board certified by ASIS. Outside of that, I'm just like another nerd in the security industry. I love this stuff with a passion, and to your point, I am the mobile evangelist now at HID and the director of end user business development for our mobile products group.
Very cool. The nerds unite. I love it. And now, Phil, when you're not talking mobile, you're building Lego sets.
Yes.
I hear. So tell us about this, and what in the world is a Lego passport?
Oh, yeah, Lego passport. It's this amazing thing. So if you go to a Lego store, you can actually, they have a little passport, and each store has a different stamp. So you can go in and get your Lego passport filled. So my family and I are sort of world travelers where our mission is to go see all 7 continents on the planet. And of course, there's no Lego store in Antarctica yet. I'm sure at some point there probably will be. But our goal is to get our Lego passports stamped at least one Lego store on every continent.
Very cool. And I'm sure that our attorneys would want me to say that we are not supported or endorsing Lego. It's just an overall cool toy that we all like. So, but I'll take the money. All right. Anywho, thank you again both for joining. Very excited to have y'all. And now, listeners, now that you know who our guests are, let's dive into this episode's burning question. Physical and mobile credentials. Can't we all just get along? All right, folks, let's start with the absolute basics. So, Lindsay, we'll start with you. How do you define a physical credential? Give me an example. What are we talking about here?
Absolutely. So I would say that a physical credential isn't just the card itself, like the blank card stock. I would find that relatively useless in the grand scheme of things. So when I think about a physical badge, I think about one that's personalized. So it's got your information on it. It gives you a way to visually identify that the wearer, the cardholder belongs wherever they are, and it has some type of identifying information, typically about the company. So a lot of times people will use it as like a brand billboard, if you will. And so I always recommend that your badge designs be very similar to whatever the brand is that you're trying to represent. They create a sense of community too for everybody that works in an organization to have the same badge design and wear it with pride and say, hey, I work here. But to me, it's really about the visual ID. So the physical card's not just the blank white card itself, whatever technology that may be that's behind it. It's really the personalization of that badge and then the ability to use that card for other things.
Very good. All right, Phil, same question to you, but how are we defining a mobile credential here, just to get our vocabulary
Yeah,
in line?
so a mobile credential is a credential that lives on your phone, and it's either going to live in the wallet of your phone or in an app on your phone, right? So there's sort of two modalities that you can choose from. One being the app-based credential is primarily going to transmit over Bluetooth Low Energy, and then the credential that lives in your wallet is primarily going to transmit over NFC.
Very good. Okay, so now that we know what we're talking about, let's talk about these things. So Lindsay, we'll start with you, and this is all about benefits, right? So you mentioned a couple, so feel free to dive deeper, add some new ones, but what would you say are some of the benefits of a physical credential and potentially maybe versus a mobile credential? But where do you really see the value on the physical side of things?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, it's about visual ID. It's about an easy and cost-effective way to identify that people in your building are supposed to be there. And that includes everybody. So like your card holders, your visitors, anybody who's walking around an organization on a regular basis. And I make the analogy, like, let's just say that Phil and I were going into a building. I worked there, Phil did not. So if we walk in the building and I use my badge, let's say we wear physical IDs at this company, I use my badge to open the door and Phil tailgates in behind me. Now we're walking down the hall, I've got a badge on, Phil does not because he's not supposed to be there. Somebody can visually, without even interacting with us, recognize that they at least need to have the next step of a conversation with Phil and say, hey, who are you? Can you help me figure out if you're supposed to be here? That sort of thing. If you reverse that and we're both using mobile credentials and we show up to the same building, I work there, Phil does not, same scenario. I use my mobile badge to get in, I'm in the door, neither of us are wearing badges. At that point, everyone else in the company has to do one of two things. They have to either assume that everybody belongs or nobody belongs. And neither of those are really great scenarios. And so at that point, some level of interaction has to happen that says like, oh, does Lindsay belong here? Does she not? Does Phil belong here? Does he not? And you just magnify that the more and more people that are in a facility. And so to me, the visual ID is the biggest component of it. The cost effectiveness is another one. And I'm sure we're going to get into all types of things about mobile credentials and infrastructure, but you've got so much existing infrastructure in the world that uses a card in some capacity. And the reality is it's difficult for people to just make a migration to support a new type of technology. The nice thing about cards is you've got a lot of flexibility in how you design it. You could hypothetically use a barcode for low security applications, and that's a very affordable, cost-effective way to make a card work with other systems. At the same time, you could also do things like multi-tech cards and make that work with a lot of legacy infrastructure that's there without a whole lot of rip and replace. So the visual security element, the cost, I think those are probably the two biggest things that make photo IDs so important to so many organizations. And I'm sure we're going to talk about different types of verticals and where those play the best. But those are the ones that I get most passionate and excited about because I think it's such a great resource for companies.
Absolutely. And you referred to it earlier as like, the billboard. So what's that community aspect that you see with the physical badge?
Absolutely. So I encourage anybody, a corporation, a school, whoever, to really just embrace their badge as like an opportunity for branding. And you can design like a really good looking badge where when you're out at lunch, I mean, I notice this because I work in the industry, but how frustrating is it when somebody has like a super ugly card design or no design at all, like a blank white card that actually like really drives me nuts. Yeah, it's the worst. And so people see that and they see what your badge design looks like. It's a reflection of your organization and people are wearing it both in the company and outside of it. But it's also a good way for people to feel a sense of community. Last week we were at a conference and everybody's got a badge on and it gives everybody a way to, when you bump into somebody in the elevator, you're here for this conference too. And you can start up conversation. It just creates a sense of belonging. And I think that we overlook that a lot. But think about what's one of the first things that people do when they take a new job. They usually take a picture of their badge or post it. There's a lot of nostalgia around that sense of community.
Absolutely. I still have my student ID card. Now, I don't look the part anymore, so I can't get into movies, but nevertheless, absolutely. Cool. All right, so thank you for walking through those benefits. Phil, same question to you. What are some of the key benefits on the mobile side of the credential house?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's the ease of distribution, right? I think there's no question that the workflow around distributing and maintaining a physical card program is quite a bit to bite off when you're looking at it from an organizational perspective. The way that mobile credentials are distributed today is completely electronically, right? So there is no need for a badge office or anything like that, right? So it can simply be distributed via an email or even now with the wallet through a self-service provisioning experience. So the major benefit, like outside of the cool factor of, I get to tap my phone to a reader and the reader goes beep, like, yeah, that's great, but that's kind of table stakes. That's what we've been doing with cards for years. The real advantage is in that maintenance and distribution. And we talk about legacy technology and sort of this retro tech that's been hanging on the wall for years and years and years. And is maintaining that physical card program holding you back from changing out that legacy hardware, right? When it's really easy to just say, you know what, I need 100 cards, let me just buy 100 cards, versus really having a long, hard look at what that legacy hardware looks like. And is that holding you back from adopting better technology to protect the assets that ultimately these systems are designed to protect? So benefit number one, cool factor. Everybody likes to use their phone for everything these days. I think I saw a statistic the other day that there are more smartphones on planet Earth than there are actual people. So they're kind of ubiquitous, and everybody's spending more time on these devices. I think the other statistic I saw is that we spend 5.5 hours per day on average on our smartphone, which means we're trying to get more and more out of it. So taking that physical pass and putting it onto the phone obviously enables just another way. And I'm sure we'll talk about these different use cases in tenant experience and student experience, but that's sort of the expectation now, is that we're doing more on the mobile device. So the cool factor, and then we can talk about all the environmental impacts of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, right? These are really the impacts that the folks at the card office and sort of in the C-suite are really caring about these days.
Very cool. Okay, so before we go into some of the more specifics, let's talk more about use cases, right? Because I can see worlds where you would absolutely need to have a visual identifier. Like, go to healthcare first and foremost. Like, if someone walks into the ER and I'm bleeding and I don't see their badge, I'm probably wondering if they're supposed to be there or not. But at the same time, there may be use cases like in higher education or commercial real estate that may not be as much of a factor. So, Phil, I'll start with you. Let's kind of blend this idea of use cases with verticals. What are some of those verticals and relevant use cases where you see mobile is really standing out as highly relevant and desirable for these decision makers?
Yeah, and I don't think this should necessarily be it's not a binary choice of, should I have a physical card with a visual ID or a mobile credential? There's certainly case for both. And unless we're talking about the federal government, there's no rule that says your physical badge also has to have your cardholder rules on it. So as a physical security professional, I'm trained on this layered approach to security, and you take your asset, you take the thing that you're trying to protect, and you build these concentric circles around it to make it as hard as possible for an adversary to make an attack against that asset. Well, I can have a really robust visual ID program and then also have the really robust, secure nature of a credential on my phone, which is sort of a more trusted device. If I'm in an environment like HID here, where we're managing the devices of our employees, well, I know that device can be trusted implicitly versus a physical card that somebody may leave behind. They may leave at the gym, or they may lose on vacation or something like that. So when we talk about verticals, so yeah, there are very specific verticals where you have to have a physical badge, and that physical badge does have to have your access control rules. But for the most part, the majority of the industry, or the majority of the access control world, could move to a mobile credential tomorrow and it would be just fine. The only places where I think it would honestly be inappropriate are places where you really need to identify individuals that they either work there or they're a source of authority.
Lindsay, same question to you. Let's talk use cases and verticals, and then anything that you have based on Phil's mentions there too.
Now, I think that there's some places where actually mobile credentials first potentially make sense. I mean, look at like multifamily housing. Like I shouldn't have to show a badge to get in my own like apartment. Like I never have had to do that historically, so that doesn't really make sense to me. I think that's a good use case for where mobile makes sense. The complicated part is when you want to easily identify people. And I look at like K through 12 schools, which is a market that we're very passionate about. We do the majority of our business in that vertical, and we had a school district this past year who implemented visual IDs for all of their students finally. And that's been normal for staff and faculty for a long time. But students is always kind of, it depends on like where you are and of course like budget money, all that kind of stuff. And so they implemented them in the fall last year, and come January, they had like a 21, 22-year-old, I can't remember, who got on a school bus and posed as a new student. So new semester, new student, first day back at school. And let's be real, some of us when we're 22 look like we're 18. And how do you know the difference between a 22-year-old that's supposed to be there and an 18-year-old who just looks like a mature 18-year-old? That's difficult, especially in large school districts. So he showed up to the school, and luckily they had implemented a policy where they're checking to look for your photo ID when you're walking in the building. And so immediately they spotted that he didn't have his badge on, and so they had a conversation. They pulled him to the side, hey, where's your badge? And he got very uncomfortable, and they could tell very easily that something was off. So they pulled him in the office. He was actually there for very malicious reasons, like we won't go into all of the details, but they were able to stop that security risk from occurring just by him not having an ID on. And I agree completely with the layered approach to security. Like badges are not the end all be all from a school security standpoint for sure, but really from any organization's standpoint. I always think of them as like the foundation. They're kind of like the first step, and they're an easy visual cue of, hey, I belong here or I don't. And you build upon a foundation. So from there, you're gonna add other things. You're gonna add door access, you're gonna add tracking capabilities, video surveillance, whatever it might be. It's all in layers. And so there's no, hey, you implement badging and now you've like solved all the world's security problems.
Right.
Like that is not the case. That's not what I'm saying by any means. But any of those places, schools for sure, hospitals you mentioned, government agencies, I think that those are where you still see a visual ID, and also where the mobile thing's kind of complicated because most of those people don't have corporate issued devices. You think about a teacher or somebody like that, like usually the school's not giving them a cell phone, and then are they gonna wanna put something on their personal device, and can you make them? And that, honestly, that's even in the private sector, that's a complicated thing right now. And if employers don't wanna provide the devices, can they mandate that you have to put something on your personal device? Probably not. So I think you always are going to encounter that, and that's something that mobile for sure has to figure out how to overcome. And the two of them coexisting is really the best case scenario in those examples.
Absolutely. And I would add to that statement, what we see in practice is this sort of more of like a choice program. Hey, in a situation in which we don't have multi-device management, right? I'm not giving you a phone, I'm relying on you to bring your own device. Well, then I give you a choice. Do you want a mobile credential? Yes, because you think it's cool or you think it's more convenient or whatever. Great, you get that, as well as a physical badge. And what we're starting to see is as folks, let's say, matriculate through their badge, they lose it, they forget it, whatever, eventually you don't get a badge anymore and it just stays on the mobile device. But another really key point here, and I think we've circled around it, but we really haven't borne down on it, is creating that culture of security at a company or at a school or whatever it is. Feeling comfortable calling someone out for not following standard practice really should be part of a good best practices conversation that all organizations should be having. So whether it's a mobile credential and feeling confident in saying, hey, listen, we don't do physical badges anymore, or we're using less and less of them. Can you show me your visual ID on your phone? Right? Is just part and parcel with saying, hey, I don't see you're wearing your badge today. Do you work here? Or feeling comfortable to call the security office and reporting somebody. Like whether it's a mobile credential or a physical card, we really need to be having that tough conversation about the culture of security in the workplace.
How do you go about overcoming that visual identifier objection when you're selling mobile? And then on the flip side, Lindsay, how do you overcome that cool factor objective whenever you're selling physical? And Phil, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I have this term that I use a lot, and it's actually respective to this culture of security conversation that we're having now. And what I call it is security theater, right? Is this placebo security, or do you have an actual visual identification program? So, the best visual ID program in the world, in my opinion, is the TSA, right? Because what are you doing? You're going to that gate agent, they're checking your identity against your boarding pass, which mine happens to be on my phone typically, right? Fewer and fewer printed boarding passes, but they're also checking your information against trusted state agencies, right? So my license from New Jersey, or the federal government issues my passport, which, by the way, passports, driver's licenses, these things expire, and they expire for a reason, because they want to get you back in to take a new picture, right? When I talk about security theater, what I'm talking about here is that ID that you've had carrying around for 15 years that still has a picture of when, however you looked 15 years ago, right? And are we just patting ourselves on the back and saying, well, we have this visual ID program, make sure you wear your badge, but nobody's actually looking at it? And, Lindsay, to your earlier point, and this is one of those challenges that we have in the security world in general, is people get stoked that, I work for HID, check out my HID badge. And quite frankly, and I don't know who from HID is going to watch this, but our badge template is not super difficult to replicate, right? If somebody sees that online, copy, paste, go buy a cheap printer off of eBay, run it through, and now, just through simple social engineering, can you hold the door for me? And now I'm sneaking right through that door, and now I'm in, and I look like I belong here because of that culture of security. So it's really more about having a conversation of, what's your visual ID checking program? Do you have that culture of security? From a mobile perspective, the identity of that credential is actually more secure, in my opinion. You may disagree, but more secure, because it's checked against a known database of individuals in the cloud in real time. So when I turn my phone over and I show you that picture is being pulled from the cloud in real time from a trusted source, versus a physical card that, let's face it, if you're using a basic badge template, anybody can replicate, which is a whole other conversation from a physical badge perspective on, are we following best practices for the identities on those badges? How often are we having those pictures taken? How often are we doing a rebadge to make sure that those pictures are appropriate, right? These are all questions that we should be asking ourselves, respective of mobile or physical.
What are your thoughts, Lindsay?
So I agree that you definitely need to have processes in place and procedures as it relates to modifying your card design. I mean, we encourage a lot of our schools and customers to update their card design at least every year. That doesn't mean that always happens. I mean, some people go every couple years, but you definitely should be updating photos annually. Lord knows you run into enough people who are like, no, I need to keep my awesome photo from 12 years ago. I was having such a good hair day. But I mean, I don't look the same as I looked 12 years ago, and so my badge design needs to reflect what I look like today. I think the biggest problem, and I agree that you definitely want to create a culture where people feel comfortable. The problem is, if you don't have something there that visually makes it easy for them to feel comfortable, it's highly likely that someone's not going to feel good about approaching a stranger. I mean, I just think about, like, let's go back to schools, and the amount that we put on our teachers and staff in a school district already is overwhelming. The stuff that they're dealing with on a daily basis is, I'm glad I don't think about it all the time. But if you then put them in a scenario where now everybody's potentially somebody that they need to approach, you've just multiplied, like, it's so much more overwhelming to them to walk up to somebody, as opposed to if there's 3 of us and 2 of us have a badge on and you don't, I still can, with a relative degree of certainty, it's not perfect, agreed, but with a relative degree of certainty, say, all right, it's highly unlikely that someone has an exact replica of this badge, so they probably do belong, and now you're the only person that I have to talk to, as opposed to all 3. If I have to have 3 conversations, I might just have none. And so we got to remember, like, humans are still going to go back to what's comfortable for them, and the easier we can make it and the more we can simplify things for them, I think the better we make the outcome, for sure.
We raise interesting points because, there's always this idea of security, layered security, a security culture. We also have, to your point, we've got administrators in K-12 and all the other verticals, and really in all of our jobs, that are trying to balance a whole lot of things in a whole lot of places all of the time. So in our industry, we know that our end users have to balance these things: security, convenience, and cost efficiency. How do we reconcile all of these needs when we're leveraging physical and or mobile credentials, knowing that the landscape is changing. So Lindsay, I'll start with you. I mean, it's an unfair question, but like, what would you say about helping end users to achieve this type of balance?
I mean, I think it starts with having a conversation and trying to figure out what their priorities are, short-term and long-term. And I would guess that Phil's probably would say something very similar. So whichever angle you're taking on it, at the end of the day, you still have to figure out where's the customer today and where do they want to be in a year and 5 years from now. And you're building a path to what that future looks like for them. And then where they want to be a year from now, at some point you're going to have a conversation of, is that realistic? Can you actually achieve that? Or do we not have the funds for this? And I mean, when you're talking about rural hospitals in the middle of Alabama and school districts in Louisiana and stuff, I mean, like, they're not the federal government, so they're not printing money. And like, they have to come up with the means to make new security measures happen, and they've got to pick and choose. And so what I love about the photo ID is, of course, like, we can start small. And I can start you with something very simple and basic, and it's not going to be perfect, but it'll get you off the ground. And then in year 2, we can come back and we can add another layer, and we can continue to build upon that. So it may not have the cool factor necessarily of like, I gave it to you on your phone, but when it's part of my identity, like my identifier when I'm in the building and how I like feel like a part of a community, and the more things I use it for in the building, the more value it has to me then. So once you're using that card to make purchases or track things or open doors, all of a sudden it may not still have been the coolest thing ever, but it's very valuable to me, and that's important too. A lot of times there's an argument that people will lose a card and they don't really care about it, like they're not going to report it or tell anybody. And when they're using it properly, and again, this all goes back to the processes and the systems that you put in place, and it is part of what you're supposed to have on when you walk in the building, and then what you do within that building, it takes no time for you to realize that you don't have it. Like, you notice right away. And so that all goes back to bringing more value to it and having the conversations about what processes are we putting in place around it.
Absolutely. Phil, same question to you.
Yeah, so I love this question because in my personal life, and like I beat this into, maybe beat is the wrong word, but I beat into my children's head, the value triangle of life, where you have value, quality, and convenience, and never can you have more than two. Right? If it's cheap and it's easy, it's not going to be worth anything, right? It's like there's no value there. So when I look at this and I look at sort of the Venn diagram of security technologies, mobile access really does kind of fit that sweet spot. And what I mean by that is, if we look at security, convenience, and cost, from a security perspective, the credential itself is the most secure credential on the market today. There is no way to get into the middle of the communication. People are far less likely to lose their phones, and HID, can't say the same thing is true for our competitors, but HID requires mandatory custom encryption keys for every end user organization for a mobile credential. So from like the security and integrity of that credential, there's no question about it. Convenience, we already talked about that, right? There's more smartphones on planet Earth than there are people. So from a convenience perspective, I've already got this thing in my pocket. So then we have to start talking about the value. And right, if we're having an honest conversation with ourselves and we're going to say, all right, well, let's compare this with the same type of credential, so like a CIOS card or a MyFair DesFire EV3 card is super secure credential, you're starting in the ballpark of $6 to $10 MSRP. And by the way, at HID, I've seen custom secure cards go out the door for $30, $40, $50 per. But let's look at this from a more holistic perspective and use that $6 to $10 number. Then you have the labor cost associated with the workflow of actually printing the card, provisioning that badge, going through those workflow processes. Plus, I can't just give you a badge. You need a lanyard. You need that stretchy dealie on the lanyard. You need the plastic sleeve for the ID, especially if it's a CIOS card. I can't slot punch it, right? So I have to have all these incidentals. And, you know, notoriously, and I tell a lot of people this, and again, sorry, HID, I know you're listening, but my badge, because I work from home, was mailed to me. Right, so that's an extra $5 or $10 of cost that goes out the door. So when you look at it from a fully provisioned cost perspective, a physical card is closer to $15 or $30, the actual true cost of this. And then when you add to the fact that at HID we know you're going to burn through your entire card stock in about 3 years. Right, it takes the normal organization to burn through their cards a 3-year time period. So by year 4, you're looking at spending between $30 and $60 per individual. When you look at the cost of mobile, now we're as low as $2 per user per year, which in that same 4-year time period, you're looking at $8 versus between 30 and 60. Now, that being said though, if the Venn diagram can have 4 circles or 4 boxes, I don't know what you would call a 4-sided Venn diagram, but if you're already spending $15 to $30 per individual, why not spend $17 to $32 and give them both, right? And now if I did forget my card, I still have this thing that I can badge myself into and still get through the door. So the Venn diagram or that triangle is like mobile access kind of fits right perfectly in that sweet spot, in my opinion.
I want to come back to that. Lindsay, there was a whole lot of math there, so
yeah,
what are your thoughts?
And I'd like to counter some of those points because I think that some of them are misconceptions about ID badge issuance and the complications that go along with issuing a card. I think that there's this concept that you print a card from one system and that then you have to then take that card and then walk it down to security and get it activated in a separate system. And those types of implementations exist. And there's like old school ID software out there, just like there's older, different mobile credential applications that don't necessarily work as seamlessly. So if we're going to do a comparison that's more like apples to apples, let's talk, there's updated software, it's 2024, where people can print a card and it be read during the print process and automatically activated with the appropriate door access privileges or whatever other systems it's being used for. So as soon as it comes out of the printer, it's active and ready to go and someone just takes it. So let's not act like from a labor perspective that this is like a very cost-intensive process. Not to mention, from a security standpoint, the single-step badge issuance definitely eliminates some of the risk of multi-step activation that we used to see a lot more. And I think that is still a reality that a lot of people face, but they can fix that by updating their ID issuance software and that platform as well, just like they could by potentially having mobile credentials. So I think it's unrealistic to assume that it's this super complicated, like really drawn-out process to get a card activated, because we're just not there anymore. The industry's improved, and it definitely used to be that way, but it isn't today. And so to that point, when you think about like credentials and you're making a case for cost per, I think that most people who are going to use a visual ID would prefer that they have a device on site to print a card. So if I lose my badge, I can reissue somebody another badge immediately. Now in a work from home environment where someone's not coming to the office, like that may be a case where he should just have a mobile badge, and when he shows up here, you give him a temporary badge for the day for him to be in the office. But if you're somebody who's in that building on a regular basis, like you're not shipping that card because you're getting it from the place that you work, which is the reality of what most people are doing. So you can eliminate the shipping costs and the additional labor costs, and then realistically, most people are not implementing the most secure card technologies out there. And we know this. So from a security standpoint, you guys work at HID. Like, you've been the subject of many conversations around card security and technologies. So, the reality is most people are using pretty affordable technologies. And again, that's all going to come back to, is this something we can fix now and we can upgrade you to a more secure technology, which would be more expensive, to Phil's point, or are we going to stay on a lower cost technology card? And that just comes back to the conversation with the customer and figuring that out. So I think that the costs aren't really as different as what might have just been articulated, but more importantly, when you think about the industry as a whole, a lot of the talk around mobile is really more about like wallet-based mobile credentials, at least from a marketing perspective. It may not be the reality of what's actually being implemented, but that's the hype right now. And I've had countless conversations about how that got messed up because there's just too many people involved. So once you've got Apple involved, and then a provisioner involved, and then a software OEM involved, and then an integrator involved, and then you make it to an end user, you've got too many people who are putting their hands in this and wanting a piece of it, and that is definitely not going for $2 a credential right now. And I've seen some very expensive mobile credentials from a wallet perspective out there just because there's too many layers. And we need to, as an industry, focus on improving that cost and bringing that cost down, because I think that we can bring some value to mobile credentials in the wallet as long as we can make them realistically more affordable for people.
Makes sense. We talk about value, and there are a plethora of use cases, some of which we have talked about within this very recording of, okay, let's say, for example, higher ed. You want to be able to use your phone because you are a younger person and you can use your phone in a lot of different ways, but you also still want and need your student ID. Another use case could be, hey, I want to upgrade from older access control technology to implement or incorporate mobile credentials, but from a cost perspective and an overhead perspective and from a labor perspective, I can't can't do that today, right? So at least for now and into the foreseeable future, there needs to be some form of balance and coexistence, right? What advice would you give to people who are looking to explore or migrate to mobile but still need physical credentials, or they're in a use case where the physical credential is of continuing importance for visual identification, for cultural needs, et cetera, et cetera? How do people get to a happy medium? What advice do you have for folks? Lindsay, I'll start with you.
I think you just have to take stock of what you've got. So first and foremost, you got to do an assessment of what you have and what it works with. And that all comes down to compatibility. And then you got to make some decisions and say, all right, if I've got X amount of money to spend and we know I want to get to mobile at some point, I need it to support a card and mobile. And make decisions about what devices you'd conquer first, and do it in phases. And I think that the more we can take a phased approach really to security as a whole with customers, the better off everybody is, because I think too often everybody tries to come in and like conquer it all and like let's just fix everything and let's upgrade everything tomorrow, and that's not realistic for customers, and they want to work with you and they want to walk through the process. So just pick the devices you're going to start with. Maybe it's your exterior doors, then maybe you move it to the interior, and then you move it to your lower security applications like copy, print, or whatever they're buying stuff at the snack corner, and that has a device at it. I mean, there's infinite ways that we use cards and mobile credentials, and just bite off, bite-sized pieces as you can.
Yeah, there's no reason to boil the ocean, right? And there is a migration path, but and I agree with everything that you just said, and I think that pretty much answers that piece of the question. But I would like to go back to the whole cost perspective from a mobile credential side of the house, because one of the things that you mentioned is not everybody's using the most secure credential, and Lord knows we certainly know that. I mean, who sells more proximity cards than HID, right? But the challenge here is making sure that we're thinking more towards the future of what we're using to protect our facilities. And if we're relying on 20 or 30-year-old retro tech to protect our facilities, I think we're sort of all fooling ourselves here.
Perfect segue into my penultimate question. What does the future look like for this world, this coexistence? But maybe we can take a glimpse at, Phil, what does the future of mobile look like to you?
Yeah, I think, Lindsay, you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier with the wallet. I think the wallet is certainly getting a lot of play because it is the most seamless thing. If I wanted to provision a credential, there's literally no workflow. It's download this app, log in with your organization, single sign-on, and your credential now lives in your access control software and your secure print system and all the other 15 systems that you have on your site. So the future is actually going more in that direction. Obviously, it's going to take us some time to get there, and supporting legacy technologies is important, but it's an important step to Lindsay's earlier point. To get to that place, you got to start having conversations with your trusted advisors, whether that's somebody like Lindsay from BadgePass or from HID. Put a committee together, start talking to the security department, the facilities department, your IT department, who's ultimately going to own the software that this resides on, and maybe even manage your devices, right? So it's really about getting that committee going and figuring out what that migration strategy looks like. But the future is bright for mobile. The way that we see it, according to independent market research, while in the next 3 years, the physical credential market will continue to grow by about 3 to 5%. The mobile credential market in that same time period will grow between 30 and 50%.
To be fair, it has a lot of ground to make
Yes, it certainly does.
on physical badges.
50% of zero is still zero or something like that. Yeah, no, we have a lot more ground to cover, but I think the takeaway really is that more and more people want to do more and more stuff with their phone. And when we have something that's more secure, less likely to be lost, stolen, or compromised, and quite frankly, more fun to use, I think the future is bright on the mobile side. But it only works, as with any security system, it only works when you have a well-devised plan to implement it.
Absolutely. Lindsay, show me your crystal ball. What does the future of physical credential look like?
Yeah, so I mean, at BadgePass, we're constantly trying to be the best badge issuance platform on the market. And to me, when I picture what a customer experience looks like and what they want from a mobile and physical badging standpoint, I want them to be able to say, all right, when I provision a credential, I choose. And I choose if I want a physical badge, I choose if I want a virtual badge, I choose if I want both. and we give them a seamless way to do that without having to have 8 million different complicated systems and multiple steps in the process. So in a perfect world, I would say that having the ability to do both things seamlessly and hopefully cost effectively is probably the dream from an issuance perspective.
The future is choice. I like
Absolutely.
that. All right, folks, final question, 30 seconds or less. The burning question for today's episode, and Phil, I'll start with you. When it comes to physical and mobile credentials, can't we all just get along?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think through this conversation we realize that there is still a place for a physical card, whether that's for a visual ID or for anything else. But it's all got to be part of a well-balanced system. Just having a thing that you strap around your neck and saying security is not necessarily security, right? So, yeah, I think we absolutely can definitely both get along.
Nice. Lindsay?
No, I definitely agree. I think it's Phil's job in life to be very polarizing when it comes to the mobile versus physical discussion. And to a certain extent, I feel like I have taken the opposite stance. But at the end of the day, I truly believe that you can't just live in the past. And I'm not saying physical ID badges are by any means the past. However, that's where we came from. I mean, mobile wasn't part of the conversation 10 years ago. But they need to evolve as part of an organization's security practices, as do mobile credentials over time. And I think that the best way for both of them to work together, to work at all, is to work together. So I think we can get along just fine.
Excellent. Well, I very much appreciate you bringing your insights from both sides of the spectrum. Very important conversation that we're having in the industry right now, and we'll continue to have for a long time to come. So thank you both for coming, and thank you both very much for your insights. Truly, truly appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Lindsay.
All right, folks, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. So again, big thank you to our experts, Lindsay and Phil, for traveling all this way to share your expertise and perspective, again, on this very exciting topic. It's been a true pleasure having our guests, and I think we were able to establish some equilibrium for the industry today. Mission accomplished. And as always, an even bigger thanks to you for joining us for this episode. We truly do enjoy creating this podcast and hope that you equally enjoy listening. Of course, we'll be back next week with yet another burning question on another hot industry topic. Speaking of which, to be the first to know when new episodes are published, be sure to subscribe to HID Connects. Doing so will ensure that you stay connected and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're out there in cyberspace, be sure to rate and review this podcast. You can, of course, also subscribe on YouTube and check us out on social. And finally, in the spirit of connection, send us your questions and topic ideas for future episodes. All you have to do is drop me a line at media@hidglobal.com. So, my friends, until next time, thanks again for listening. May your identities forever be secure.